Today we are going to be going over the second and third phase of Walmart's Supplier Quality Excellence Program, or what we call SQEP. Before we start, we always like to introduce ourselves. My name is Danielle Gloy. I will be monitoring the chat today, and then leading our content is Peter Spalding. Our job is to research and write about topics that are helpful and insightful for suppliers like you, which, if this is your first time joining one of our webinars, we are part of Supplier Wiki, which is kind of like the educational arm of SupplyPike. So we help create free educational resources like these webinars. We have multiple ebooks that cover content across different retailers. We do a variety of articles. We also address a lot of retailer updates and news in our Vendorville newsletter. So if you want to stay in the loop, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. Our goal is to make content that is going to be the most beneficial to you and that is ultimately going to set you up for success. So if there's any content that you maybe want to see more of, please feel free to reach out to us so that we can help create that for you. So moving on to the agenda, we have a lot to cover in these 30 minutes. So we're going to start off the content portion by doing a brief overview of the SQEP program. We will do a deep dive into the second and third phase of SQEP. So this is where we'll be going over barcode and labeling compliance and packaging, pallet, and load compliance. Then we'll move into a more action-oriented section where we will break down the steps that can be taken to dispute SQEP fines in HighRadius. And finally, we will be opening the floor for some Q&A time with Peter and myself at the end. And we'll wrap up the webinar with a product preview of SupplyPike for Walmart. So we have a lot of good content to cover today. All right. So here are a few FAQs that we typically get during webinars. So first being, will we be getting a copy of the slide deck? Yes, absolutely. You can expect to see the PDF version of the slide deck as well as the recording of this webinar appear in your email inbox in about 3 to 4 business days. If you ever want to find another webinar that you maybe weren't able to attend, or if maybe the email got lost among your other emails, you can go to our website where you will find the recordings there as well as the PDF version of the slide decks. They are always accessible to you. And the second question that we typically get is, what is the best way to ask a question? So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A tab that has 2 little speech bubbles. And this is where we ask you to please submit any questions related to the content, as I'll be able to monitor them and then tee them up for Peter for the Q&A time at the end. And so last little thing before we get into today's content, SupplyPike is a platform designed to help suppliers get paid and get better. So we do this with a software that identifies, recovers, and prevents deductions and compliance issues. We do this in a lot of different ways with multiple different retailers like Amazon, Target, Home Depot, Kroger, CVS, and Walmart. Some things we cover at Walmart include AP deductions, OTIF, SQEP, overages. So anything that could be impacting your bottom line, we have both these tools to help target and resolve those revenue loss issues. And just a little shout out, we work with a lot of great suppliers. We have some of them up here on the slide today. And if you aren't currently working with us, we would love to see your brand's logo up here in the future. And with that, I will hand it over to Peter to get into today's content.
Thank you, Danielle. Yes, as Danielle mentioned, we're on half an hour today instead of a full hour. So I'm gonna have to be moving at a much faster pace. I normally talk too much for the regular hour, so this will be pretty interesting. But yeah, hopefully we'll have enough time at the end for our product preview. If we go over a little bit, of course, feel free to jump off if you need to. But definitely try to get your questions in early if you have them. The Q&A time officially is supposed to start at 11:20. So if you have any questions that are kind of percolating right now, maybe just kind of start thinking in that direction, and we can get going. But this first part, I'm gonna kind of fly through because I hope most of you are familiar with SQEP or SQEP, at least on a kind of like a basic level. But yeah, this is a more or less kind of post-COVID initiative of Walmart's side of trying to basically just improve compliance and improve supply chains to be as efficient as possible, have this zero-based mindset. And it was broken down into a number of different component parts, with scheduling and transportation as the kind of still not yet there piece. So that is likely to be released in the next year, I think, from right about now. That's what we've heard. But still, I mean, we've been hearing that for years. So we've been hearing it since 2021. So there's no real kind of guarantee. And we also have very little idea of what that would actually be. If that has more to do with ship points and collect shipping or something like that, all of that kind of remains to be seen. So stay tuned for phase 4. That one hasn't come out yet, but basically we're looking at the first 3 phases are all live and running, and there are defect fines in place for those already. So there's some really high level stuff we want to call out at, early on talking about SQEP. There are 3 really important apps for avoiding SQEP fines, for having a really good kind of performance scorecard. The first one is the big one that everyone's familiar with, the SQEP scorecard. That's really for tracking compliance and reporting on SQEP performance over time. Fix It is another big one. This graphic doesn't really do a great job of differentiating these, but SQEP and Fix It, the SQEP scorecard and Fix It are both Retail Link apps. HighRadius is not a Retail Link app. It is a separate software company that Walmart has brought on to do the disputing side of SQEP. So if you're going to make a dispute, you're going to do that in HighRadius. It's a third-party app. You can get access to it through your Retail Link administrator, but it isn't in the app section on Retail Link. Whereas the SQEP scorecard, just like the OTIF app, and Fix It, those are all in Retail Link. Fix It is a more granular thing. I don't think we'll be getting in too much detail about Fix It today, which is a shame because it is very important for phases 2 and 3 compliance. But yeah, that's where you can really see the actual images that are uploaded of the instances of non-compliance. It's very important for doing any kind of actual disputing with SQEP. We see a lot of people have limited success with disputing SQEP fines. Where we have seen people make success happen with disputing SQEP fines is whenever there's an image and whenever there's proof in the image that what's being pictured is not what is actually being described in the fine itself. So that's what Fix It is really important for. If you're going to have success disputing SQEP fines, generally speaking, it'll be because the evidence is there in the photographs. So if you're not familiar with these apps, definitely familiarize with yourself with them. Check them out. Fix It is the more granular, detailed level. SQEP is a very high level, kind of company-wide or 6 or 9 digit level performance on SQEP. And then HighRadius is where you'll go to look at the fines themselves and to dispute them if that's what you're going to do. So that's all that. Fix It portal, I've touched on this a little bit. This is from Walmart's perspective, this is where they're looking for corrective action. And this is what compliance is all about. This is what the SQEP program is all about. How can we avoid problems like this from happening again in the future? Well, it's going to have to happen on that granular individual level. So clicking an individual ticket will give you access to the photos taken at the DC that pertain to the particular error. Also, we don't recommend using Fix It as a dispute portal because it's not for that, but we have seen some fines get removed through that chat feature in Fix It. I'm not sure if I get into this in greater detail later on. Yeah, so I'll just mention this now. In the individual tickets, there's a little chat box. Now, this is not a chat box. You're not going to get more than one response. You can ask one really solid and specific question about that particular fine, about that particular instance of a lack of compliance or a compliance error. And that question you will probably have answered. So carefully wording that question is really important. If you ask a follow-up question later on, they're unlikely to respond. So, but what we have seen is if there's a picture and you're saying the pallets look fine in this, I got fined for pallet compliance, what's going on there? If it's a specific enough question, if it's direct enough, sometimes what will happen is the whole ticket will be erased and the fine won't actually go through at the end of the month. So that we've seen happen before. It's a very interesting, it's very different from a regular AP deduction. And that's going to be a big kind of message that I have for this webinar, is just that we need to think about compliance as different from your standard AP deduction. AP deductions are there's a whole world of disputing that happens there. Disputing is such a big part of the AP deductions kind of space. In SQEP and in OTIF, especially at Walmart, you're much more likely to have success if you can avoid the fines altogether. And this is one of the ways that we can do that. If we can actually make the fine go away at the fix-it level through the chat box. But it's tricky. Doesn't always happen that way. Here's a little bit of the dashboard, what it looks like. You see all of that awaiting corrective action. Most of the time, what fix-it is used for is not the disputing. It's not that chat box function so much as it is, well, what actually went wrong here? Is this something that we need to talk with our 3PLs about? Is this something that we need to work on our end? Do we need to update XYZ barcodes or whatever? But the language that Walmart will use, and again, Walmart they're not twisting their mustaches necessarily, but the language that they're using is that there's a problem with what you did and we're awaiting your corrective action. So, but some of the times, again, they are really just pointing out what is a receiving error or something like that. So it's about trying to toe that line, of course, like anything else in business, especially in the retail industry. It's about trying to, how can I communicate that there was a receiving error in the best way so that we can avoid it in the future? So basically like turning corrective action sort of back on Walmart to an extent. Or is there a problem with our supply chain at some point in this issue? Is there a problem with our policies? Is there a problem with our 3PLs? Are we seeing patterns in any of that? And then how can we narrow it down enough to fix particular issues? And then once you get to a certain level of fluency, I guess, in your supply chain, then those individual problems become much easier to fix or address or just eat. I think that the zero-based mindset that Walmart is talking about doesn't take into consideration that we live in the world and that there are just problems that happen that are unavoidable sometimes. So is this an instance of an individual human error or an act of God, an act of nature, that this DC is not receiving properly because there was a storm or something like that, right? So at what point do we just need to eat a fine? At what point does Walmart need to eat a fine and not a fine exactly, but eat their profits, right? So how are these avoidable? How are they not? So breaking it down in terms of that and having a very efficient and fluid supply chain just makes it easier to be able to tell, are these patterns or are these just one-offs? So yeah, all that. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but yeah. So fix it again. It's most important for phases 2 and 3. What you're looking at is the actual kind of physical process of compliance. That's what phases 2 and 3 are. We're looking at barcode and labeling. We're looking at pallet stuff, all of that, right? We're not talking about the ASNs. We're not talking about PO compliance. That's what phase 1 is. And we're not talking about like scheduling and stuff like that, which is presumably what phase 4 will be all about. So this is a lot of Walmart's language for describing what phase 2 actually is. What it comes down to is your supply chain compliance. I'm trying to think of the name of the document. It's escaped me. Your secondary packaging guide, supply chain, the supply chain portion of the secondary packaging guide. That's what this is all about. So of course, familiarize yourself with that. and it'll have much more detailed, granular instructions for how to deal with this stuff. But again, it depends on who you are. It depends on what your problems are. You're probably not on the logistics side of things, or maybe you are. I don't want to assume anything. But from a financial perspective, it really is important to understand the logistical side of things too. And a big part of what we're trying to do just with Supplier Wiki generally is to help these different teams speak the same language, right? The finance team, the sales team, the supply chain team, the logistics 3PL or whoever, right? All of these people, if they're all speaking the same language, it can be really helpful. So looking at Walmart's language is helpful for unifying that whole front. But yeah, phase 2, we're looking at labeling and we're looking at barcode compliance. So this is all about making it as easy as possible for the receiving teams at Walmart to scan the labels and scan the barcodes. And we'll be spending a lot of time talking about, again, the financial side of this, right? So what do these fines actually look like? Well, basically things are automated or they're inspected. And the future is automated, right, for everything, but especially for DCs, especially for receiving. Walmart, because it's so massive, has had a hard time being able to automate everything. But that's definitely the change that is on the horizon. And this is the big takeaway from this whole section that I want to look at. And this goes for phase 3 as well. The automation looks cheaper. The automated fines do not look as expensive, right? Because you don't have to pay that big $200 admin fee. Well, what we've seen in the data is that the more automated things are, the more fines people are receiving. Now, that might be just a learning curve, and eventually the supply chains will adapt to the automated receiving and be able to give them exactly what they want in a much more efficient way. But what we're seeing is right now, in this period of transition, as things become more automated at the DC level, the fines are stacking up. So again, the admin fee, we want to get rid of inspection. We want things to be automated. We want things to be more efficient. But at the same time, in the short term, it might be a big pain. It might be a big pill to swallow, right? So that's what inspection and automation really is. So here's our inspection example. Of course, things are measured in defects per million, and you can see all of that in the SQEP dashboard too. So if 12 cases were inspected and there were 3 defects, you're looking at a defects per million score of 250,000 because it's a quarter of everything that is actually a defect, right? So simple math example there, you're 75% compliant. Now, what you do is in order to calculate that, you have to add on the flat $200 inspection fee for every defect. You have to add that to the cases that are impacted, and then your fine there is going to be $203. Now, again, it looks like the majority of this fine is really coming from that inspection fee, and it is in this particular example. But the inspection fees are not as costly as the automation is because there's just such a tiny amount of cases that are actually inspected relative to the whole, right? So, or at least that's what we're seeing, is that when things become more automated, it can catch more instances of non-compliance. Now, with automation, Walmart should be more accurate in their receiving, right? That's the whole point. If the automation is not accurate in their receiving, it should also be flagged really quickly. But the question is, who's going to be holding them accountable? It might have to be the suppliers. The suppliers might have to be the ones who are saying these are actually legit. But of course, all of that depends on education. Okay, in this case, there's 200 cases that are received, 2 items with 100 cases each, and there were 100 defects. So you're looking at a 50% compliance rate, and there's no flat fee for the automation. You're getting $100 fine there because half of them are inaccurate. So, yeah, in that example, it's a cheaper one, but the point that I personally would like to make is that automation is not cheaper, at least not in the short term. All right, in phase 3, we're looking at packaging, pallet, and load compliance, right? So all of this stuff is sort of like a one-off. You know, if you're getting a ton of these fines, there is actually supplier action that can be made that can fix it for the most part, unless there's a repeated issue that's happening at a particular DC or something like that. So all of these sections in the secondary packaging guide that you're getting are pretty clear about what they're looking for with this. One thing to call out is just that you're going to make sure that you want to have the most recent, the most updated version of the secondary packaging guide, because those change every year. The last one I think came out in January or February, and yeah, there were some changes that were made. And of course, there are changes that are being made all the time as things become more automated. So pallet compliance example, this is an inspection example as well. You're looking at 66% compliance there if there are 3 defects on 9 pallets, right? You're only a third of the way there. So this calculation is somewhat different. A charge is multiplied by the number of POs that are affected, right? So there's a $200 fine that's on that level. And then there's a different charge that is multiplied by the number of pallets affected. So the fine that you're looking at there is based on POs and pallets. So the individual things and then the orders is how you're looking at that. We're going to fly through disputing in HighRadius here so that we can make sure that we have enough time for questions. Make sure to get your questions in too early if you can. So there's a number of things that you're looking for. Obviously, it depends on the situation, right? But here's some things that you're basically going to be seeing is like most of the time when you're disputing phase 2 and 3 fines and HighRadius, here's what you're going to need. You're going to need the PO number, the item number, the defect type, the DC number, and the number of impacted cases. There's a number of other things that you might need depending on how specific the issue is. I was calling out the images and fix it. Sometimes images and fix it are helpful at the dispute point. If you're including the item number, the PO number, all of this information, and then you're also including some of the images from fix it, it can help, you know, it's just your single source of truth. Everything is all there, right? So that's what this slide is all about, disputing packaging related fines. Sometimes maybe the wrong image is attached to it, right? People are doing this process and people make mistakes. Maybe there's a wrong image. Maybe there was a miscommunication about what particular issue there was with this shipment, right? And that's visible in the images. Sometimes the images, because they're just very low quality, are completely unhelpful. And in those instances, it's sort of like the rug is taken out from under you. You have to take Walmart at their word because there isn't an actual legitimate sort of thing going on there. In that case, what do you do? How do you actually communicate about it? Well, it might make sense to take that question to the chat bot and fix it to say, I can't tell if this fine is legit or not based off of these images, right? So I'm going to dispute it or something like that, right? I'm not sure what that relationship is like for you guys. How you would want to do that, how you want to handle that. Is that something you want to handle with your buyer, or do you want to try to do it and fix it or HighRadius, right? So there's a lot of different levels and layers to it, but the images can be helpful for this as well too. So you can dispute open and you can dispute closed bills as well, as a little call out. We don't want people thinking that closed bills can't be disputed. This is just bills that have been paid off or matched with the transactions or not, right? So those are open bills, and after matching, they're marked as closed, but they can both be disputed there. So select the charge that you would like to dispute by clicking the box, and you can select a lot of them. Say there's an instance of a bunch of fines accidentally get sent out, but it was all just a particular DC got hit with bad weather or something like that, right? You're going to want to select all of those and dispute them all together because there's a single issue that's going on there. Dispute reason, amount to be disputed, and comments. These are all really important. The dispute reason is essential, and the amount to be disputed is essential as well. Comments are more likely than not going to be essential. And then attachments, again, we always recommend. It's a good idea just to have all of that in there in the same place. But again, this is a much more manual process than APDP is. It's a much more manual process of actually reviewing these disputes as well. So yes, I think making it succinct and making it simple, straightforward is the best way to do that, because someone is just going through a lot of these. So kind of thinking about it in those terms. Of course, you can save these for later and you can submit them as well. And then you can follow up under the disputes tab. So very just kind of high level way of looking at it. And of organizing all of that I hope is a little bit helpful for those of you who are less familiar with HighRadius. But yeah, it's a standard dashboard and you would kind of go about it that way. Those are some regular kind of speed bumps that people experience. We always like to call out that these things are connected, right? The SQEP team, the OTIF team, the AP deductions teams at Walmart, these are all separate from each other and they function separately, but that doesn't mean that these things are not kind of intimately connected in terms of the supply chain. A particular error, receiving or delivering, we can think of it as potentially having a lot of different consequences and adding up, right? So yeah, all of that is just to say a shortage can be connected to an overage and vice versa, right? So those should always be thought about kind of in tandem where possible. Again, it helps if you have something like SupplyPike that can kind of do some of that work for you, but all of that it can become really costly in the long run. And when it comes to compliance, again, it's about Walmart's language isn't completely unhelpful. It does help to think of this in terms of what are the corrective actions that we can make to stop the bleeding at this particular point. But it looks like we have some questions. Danielle, what do you got for us?
Well, thank you for going through all of that content, Peter. The first question that I have for you today is from Jess. Jess says, hello, inspection and automation in phase 2. Are we already receiving both? I know that we receive a lot of inspection type charges. Will we move to automation only, or is that already happening?
Yeah, I think that you'll know whenever it happens. What I can speak to is that I know of a lot of suppliers who are also only getting inspection fees. And I think that automation is on the horizon, like it will happen at some point. I imagine that it might be a little bit more of a sea change that is kind of abrupt, just, knowing Walmart and how these things happen. So I would say it's more something that we want to just kind of be talking about in our teams and kind of preparing people for that. This all might change a little bit in the future, but I do know of a lot of other people who are only getting those inspection related fines. So I would just say, yeah, it's something to kind of be cognizant of. But I will also say that SQEP, Walmart was pushing SQEP really hard the last a couple of years ago, and there's been a noted slowing down. I will say we can infer that phase 4 taking 2-3 years to actually finish getting developed. To me, the inference that I make of that on Walmart's side is that it's not their priority right now. They're moving on to other things, right? So there's still a SQEP team. There's still people who are going through this whole process, but maybe the perception is just that SQEP is kind of adding insult to injury for suppliers, and maybe what we want to do is to prioritize reporting and something like that. Like, let's just move all of our energy over to Luminate to try to make sure that we have more accurate reporting or something like that. So, but my belief is that automation is still on the horizon, but you're not the only one who hasn't received those yet. But so my understanding is you see whenever it's an inspection related fine, whenever it's an automated fine, I don't know if they're advertising that on the ticket itself, or if what they're saying is just kind of like that it wasn't inspected. So I would just kind of keep an eye out for that.
Thanks for that question, Jess. The next one that we have is of a more shipping related. We are moving to collect. Will Walmart then be responsible for their pallets conditions?
That's a great question. Yeah, I would assume that you are completely not involved with that. If Walmart doesn't give itself SQEP fines, so that is a part of it. What we're looking at when we're looking at the more detailed packaging stuff, it's just the stuff that you're producing. This, I've never heard of this happening, but if you are receiving fines for collect shipments for pallet compliance, then I would dispute those under that banner of, this is collect. So these aren't our pallets. I haven't seen that. I haven't heard of it as an issue, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen. And I would imagine if it is going to happen, it would probably happen during that transition period. So I think that's a really great shout out too. But it's not something that I've heard of. If other people have experienced that, are you getting these compliance fines for collect shipments? But with SQEP, it's phases 2 and 3 are much more kind of relevant for prepaid shippers generally. If you're shipping collect, you can still get hit with phase 2 and 3 fines, but for pallets, unless they're your pallets that Walmart is using, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's something. So sorry, Roseanne has just mentioned we are a collect customer, so just shipping collect and receiving pallet condition fines. So yeah, definitely, I'd look into that. Okay, Jeanette is also getting them too. Our company is collect. We are fined for pallets. We put the orders on the pallets. If a pallet is used and is poor quality, then we are fined. Yeah, so it would just be about making sure that you're aware of the sourcing for those pallets. If you're shipping collect and you're not doing the pallets, then that would be something that's disputable, I suppose. But I think the consensus is that when you move to shipping collect, they are still your pallets, and so Walmart will still be sending out fines for that. That would be my kind of best guess for that. We also had another call out earlier here. Jess said in the chat that they focus on not disputing in HighRadius, but trying to catch it and fix it. So push back on fix it tickets before they become a fine. That's what I've heard a lot too, is just that you're much more likely to get something removed if it hasn't become a fine yet. And one way of thinking about that is just that HighRadius, again, is a partner. It's not Walmart themselves. So if they're sending it out to a partner, it just becomes a much more complicated thing to tie all that together. But yeah, great. Okay, so a couple of takeaways there at the end, just to reiterate, to make sure we're all on the same page here too. When you're shipping collect, those may still be your pallets, right? You're still going to be palletizing it in your own warehouses, right? If they're not, though, it's going to be really important to be aware of that, so that if you're getting fined for those, you won't. And then, of course, fix it. Try to nip it in the bud earlier on, and then it'll be easier to avoid.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. And just people in the chat, we really appreciate the insights and the engagements. In the meantime, I just want to call out some of our resources. If you're looking for more hands-on material, we have multiple free educational ebooks, like I mentioned earlier. A great one to go hand in hand with this webinar is that SQEP handbook. We also recently released a new cheat sheet on Walmart departments, categories, and fine lines. Essentially, it is a resource that breaks down like the item hierarchy at Walmart. So we'll see some information on accounting departments, item subcategories, and fine lines. There is also item analysis with Supplier One and Luminate in this resource. So I will go ahead and send it in the chat so you can download it if it is something that you are interested in. And if you would like to contact us, if you think of any questions later on, or you would like to share any more insight, please feel free to reach out to us on our email, or you can find us at supplypike.com. We would love to continue that conversation with you. But this is all we have for our content portion of today's webinar. We're going to switch it up and move on to our product preview, where we will go into some of our deduction solutions. So Peter is going to show you some really cool features and just give you a little insight into how we could potentially help you.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. And thanks everyone in the chat for helping us through that. It's really great just, the best way for suppliers to learn is from each other, people who are really boots on the ground and engaging with all these things all the time. So I love to see that. It really warms my heart, and I really appreciate it. So today we won't be talking about the SQEP product actually that we have. We do have a SQEP product. Our demo page is down currently. So, but we'll be talking about the deductions side of things generally. And there's a lot of similarities here in terms of the dashboard and in terms of the philosophy of SupplyPike, what SupplyPike is really trying to do with suppliers and to help suppliers. So I actually want to start out on our deductions page because that could be a little bit more helpful. What we have here are our AP deductions, right? So we're looking at this is the cash that is being withheld. Here's the cash amount. And there's a lot of other details in here that can be a little bit disorienting. But going into one of these, I think will be helpful for giving a sense of how SupplyPike works, right? People hear automating deductions. Everyone is talking about automating deductions now. Most of the time, what they mean by that is, well, we'll pay someone to go through and do all of that work for you, and it'll be a lot less efficient, a lot more expensive. And yeah, you'll be winning disputes back, but it won't be as efficient as it could be. The difference, SupplyPike, what we do is we integrate with RetailLink and we find all the shipping documents. So we integrate your shipping documents with the actual data that Walmart is saying, the actual information that Walmart is saying, and we find the misalignments there. So what we can do is we can automatically find all of the deductions where we have basically from Walmart and from your own shipping documents proof that this is not a valid fine. So we can go through it, we can comb through everything right away and just say like, all right, there's 100 things here that you can dispute and the likelihood of winning it back is really high, right? Or the likelihood of it being invalid is really high. So therefore the likelihood of you winning that money back is really high too. So how do you do that? Well, we just align everything here from the PO to the invoice received report, the claim itself, and the BOL, right? If all of these things are aligned and we can scan it right away to try to figure out what it's actually trying to communicate, then we can create a narrative and we can create the root cause analysis there too. This is likely invalid because the shipped quantity matches the invoice quantity on deducted items, right? It does match up. All this matches up. And you probably received in full what you thought was short. So that's kind of just the basic philosophy of the SupplyPike software. That's kind of how it works. And I like to start with that on the really detailed, granular level of an individual deduction, because that's what normally kind of trips people up is how are you actually doing all of these things? Well, we're not really doing anything. The software is just kind of amalgamating. It's bringing everything together and it's creating that single source of truth that can then make disputing and winning invalid deductions back a lot smoother, a lot less painful. Okay, so that's that. Another thing that I want to call out is another way that we automate these things or that we make them a lot more efficient and hands-free is we have a auto dispute feature. So what this does is basically you could turn it on for individual codes. Say you want to turn it on for carton shortage SLC. This is a very common deduction. About 80% of all revenue loss comes from shortages. This is because it is very hard to keep up with retailer demands. And then let's say, well, I want to automate it, but I only want to dispute the ones that we're completely sure are invalid. Maybe APDP is overwhelmed and we're thinking, well, we don't want to give them a lot more disputes than we absolutely need to. Let's just auto dispute the invalid ones. Well, we can do that for 23s. We can do that for 22s as well. And then we can save those changes here. And then I can still check SupplyPike. I can still check APDP when I need to, but a lot of this stuff will start just kind of running itself automatically. So you can save those changes there. You could also delimit it around a cash minimum or a cash maximum, which makes sense if there's a massive shortage deduction, right? And it's indicative of a larger issue. That's maybe something that we want to keep on our dashboard and keep pretty high up so that we can monitor it, because it might not be it might not be just a simple shortage deduction. I'm going to speed up here because we're way over time. But I also love to highlight this. This is very helpful for reporting to higher ups, maybe a CFO. Why are you spending all this money on software? Well, we can look at, here's what we've actually won back through the software. And so here's the return on investment, stuff like that. Very helpful. You can do root cause analysis based off of deduction codes. What's the individual root cause that's actually that we're actually looking at? What are our deductions over time? And then you could look at item number as well. You can use this information to make a lot of insights, and not just for deductions, but for overages, OTIF, and SQEP as well. So that's all that we really have time for getting into today. If you want to see a more kind of in-depth demo, if you want us to plug your data in so that we can show you how much you can win back right away, then shoot us an email and we can set you up with that.
That is all that we have for you guys today. Thank you so much. Our next webinar will be short shipping deductions, and that will be on the 11th of July. So if you would like to see some more content, we encourage you to go and sign up for that. But with that, we just hope you guys have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.